Good evening and welcome back to part 2 of the Queries episode where we're discussing the ramifications of House Bill 68 and what this is going to mean for transgender individuals, both youth and adults here in the state of Ohio. So in part 1 we were looking at the medical side, and we'll probably still be pulling you in, doctor. It's kind of like the mob, we're going to keep pulling you in when necessary. But from the political side of things, how all of a sudden did this become just this gargantuan issue that the state House and Senate, our General Assembly, had to put stop everything and we're going to focus on this? Was there any one thing that caused this?
Well, we'll never really know. Mm-hmm. Honestly, we don't really know what they're thinking, unfortunately. But if we were to try to read the tea leaves, mm-hmm. We're going to look back at the November ballot initiative mm-hmm. here in Ohio. And we know that issue 1, which protects reproductive rights and wrote that into the Ohio Constitution, passed very strongly. Mm-hmm. Yep. And it seemed, for some reason, to light a fire mm-hmm. under those in the Republican caucus who are seeking to prove just how Republican or just how conservative mm-hmm. they are. And let's be clear, we've been fighting the athletics portion of HB 68 for 5 years. Mm-hmm. We've been fighting the medical care ban portion of this for 3 years. Mm-hmm. So this has been something that has been on their minds, and reasonable minds prevailed in previous years. Sure. And it's what we found historically here in Ohio, at least Equality Ohio has found. There has been some measure of reasonableness that is going to prevail. And we've essentially seen that has left the building. Mm-hmm. And it does look very much like this has become their talking point, their way of proving just how conservative they are. They're using literally trans young people as their kind of like political wedge issue. Mm-hmm.
Because nothing says integrity quite like using children to make a political score. That's some integrity right there.
Yeah. Well, and if you look at the law in particular, it's confusing mm-hmm, because sure. when you look at HB 68, which unlike the rules that were proposed mm-hmm. following the governor's veto mm-hmm. of HB 68, it is only dealing with minors. And as Dr. Stewart shared with us in the previous segment, all of that care for minors happens with the consent of their parent or guardian. Mm-hmm. Young people under the age of 18 are not walking into medical buildings and seeking out and receiving care, actually getting that care without their parents saying that's okay.
And doesn't this fold nicely into the whole parents' rights movement?
And that's the question. This is absolutely about parents' rights, the right of a parent in any other medical situation, for any other medical condition, that a young person, any other situation when a young person would be seeking out medical treatment, that decision would be between that young person, their parents, and their medical professionals, and the government wouldn't dare intrude. Mm-hmm. This is blatant overreach by Ohio's government.
Mm-hmm. What I found interesting was, there were a lot of people that when the governor vetoed HB 68 and went on in front of cameras and was talking about this is a decision that's best left with families, with the parents, the child medical professionals, and it's not it's really not the role of the state mm-hmm. to come between that particular process and that particular relationship.
Right.
So I think there were people that were cheering. It's like, oh, cool, again, saner minds have prevailed, until the executive order that Governor DeWine put forward. So can you explain a little bit about what the difference between HB 68 and what the governor's executive order is doing?
Absolutely, and we actually have three different pieces. We've got HB 68, we've got the executive order, and we've got some proposed rules. So HB 68, which went through the legislative process, only deals with minors. So it's dealing with minor health care, gender affirming care, as well as participation by trans athletes in sports. And that's all it dealt with. There was no conversation about adult gender affirming care in HB 68, and there still isn't. The governor's emergency rule through that executive order, the only thing that went immediately into effect is a ban on surgery on anyone, a gender affirming surgery on anyone who is under 18. And again, as we heard during the first segment, this was a solution to a problem that did not exist, does not exist, because it was not happening.
Right.
That is the only part of that executive order that is actually in effect right now. The rest of the executive order directed two agencies to create rules, to create proposed or draft rules. Those are the Ohio Department of Health and the Ohio Department of Mental Health and Addiction Services.
Now, a quick question that popped into my mind. Usually, like in government, when new rules come out, there's a period where there's commentary by the public. Is that also true in this case with the proposed rules that will come out?
Absolutely, except for the emergency rule. The emergency rule is in place, but for the bulk of them are these proposed rules, and absolutely there's a comment period, and we are absolutely engaged in that comment period, and we encourage all community members, allies, community members to be involved. Now, there are dates that we have to think about. With the Department of Mental Health and Addiction Services, their comment period ends on Friday, January 19th, so we've got a week there. And then with the Department of Health, their comment period ends on February 5th. Now, the advocacy does not end with the comment period.
Sure.
There are further steps to the legislative process, and we are going to be engaged in every single step of this because, at least on paper, in theory, this is our opportunity to be as clear as possible, as Dr. Stewart was telling us during the first portion of this, about how intrusive and how inappropriate these proposed rules are. And they are. These proposed rules, if accepted, if put into place as drafted right now, and I want to be clear, they're not in place right now,
Sure.
But if they were in place as drafted right now, they would be the most restrictive on gender affirming care for adults in this country.
So Ohio wins the race to the bottom. Way to go, Ohio.
Unfortunately.
Yeah.
And we're going to try to stop that.
Yes. I hope so.
Yes.
This is a win streak we don't want.
It is not. It is not.
It's just mind-boggling. Now, just in terms of, and I hope I don't bring up any PTSD with this next question, but could you sort of explain the legislative piece of this in terms of what Equality Ohio went through? And, Bobbie, I think you even were a part of it as well.
Yes.
And Dr. Stewart, were you involved in any of this at all on the political side? No. Thank heavens for that. It's bad enough as is. But so explain this process, because I can't, my brain goes to, you were probably knocking on doors and people were like, yeah, we're not even going to bother talking to you.
Not quite knocking on doors. We don't do that part of the political process.
I was hoping for that. But no.
But what we were doing, though, is making sure that the community was aware and providing pathways for advocacy. So during this process, HB 68, it started in the House of Representatives. It's introduced. It has a set of hearings in a committee. It's assigned to a committee. It has hearings in that committee. And during that committee process, during those hearings, is the opportunity for community members, organizations, professionals, experts to weigh in on this process. And boy, did we weigh in. Over 585 pieces of testimony were submitted on HB 68 between both the House process and the Senate process.
Sorry, 585,
and that's unheard of when it comes to engagement on a piece of legislation.
What was so in terms of, again, sort of the evidence provided, that sort of thing, how much was presented by the anti-trans side? Anywhere near that number?
Not anywhere near that. We're going to say that their pieces of testimony and their witnesses that they offered in the low 20s, I believe, of all those pieces, and a number of them were flown in from out of state. They were not even Ohioans.
I don't even know what to say to that, but well, I do know what to say to that, but this is going to be on Family Hour, and I can't say what I would like to. Now, at any point during the process, for both you and Bobbie, when you were giving your testimony, did you actually feel like you were truly being listened to, or was it more of a, well, they're just putting on a show to make it look like democracy is in action?
Whew. Bobbie, did you want to?
At no point did I feel that they were listening to us. They had their minds made up from day one, what they were going to do, and nothing we said was going to change their minds. And there's nothing that they could say that would change my opinion on that.
And it makes sense that Bobbie would feel that way.
Sure.
Because of the number of medical experts that testified against HB 68. So at the point that our legislature is willing to ignore board-certified, award-winning medical professionals from hospitals which have recently been named some of the best in the country, and they're willing to ignore those. Also, on the House side, we actually have a couple of physicians who serve in the Ohio legislature. And those physicians, a few of those physicians testified. And those are physicians who actually provide OBGYN care and pediatric care and have provided gender-affirming care. So they were willing to ignore the voices of their colleagues who held expertise in this area, in addition to the countless patients, young people, parents. Just as we had parents literally look our legislators in the eye and tell them, but for gender-affirming care, my child would not be standing next to me right now. And then saw that child and looked them in the eye as they told their story. So it's not surprising to me, Bobbie's feelings on that, because of how much we know how much they ignore.
We brought our testimony to the table. We brought it. And nothing that we said sunk into them. I live in a rural district and I see it day in and day out, the information that they don't hear anything we say at all.
Well, and I guess this is, it's the whole echo chamber effect. I mean, part of me thinks, well, we're going to go draconian because, we'll wind up on Fox News and we'll get to tout our win here. And this is a big win for kids. And it's just, it's mind-boggling. I cannot fathom that level. It's willful ignorance.
Yes.
Willful ignorance, or if it's not ignorance, it's just pure, I want power and I'll do anything I can to get it and keep it. And that is gut-wrenching. And I guess the other thing too that, for me raises some alarm bells. Okay, well they're going after trans people because, number one, just in terms of the size of the community,
right,
it's very small. So that's pardon me, the low-hanging fruit for them.
Easy target.
Yep,
Yes.
Very easy. What are they going to do to the rest of the LGBT community after this? I mean, it's, there's all sorts of stories coming in from other parts where, heck, there's some Christian group that was suing, we don't stop PrEP because, we don't want to be, our money is associated and we don't want, and a judge agreed. And it's like, what else? It's like, what level of hell are we going to be descending into anytime soon? And so, I mean, what you're doing is, I can't even it's so extraordinarily important.
And it's important that people pay attention and get involved. Because you said the right thing. This is, the trans community is a smaller community, which means it's a historically marginalized community. And the idea is that it remain marginalized and not actually be able to move out of that place of marginalization. And in a state like Ohio, where we still do not have a statewide LGBTQ non-discrimination law, which means in most parts of this state, unless you're living in Dayton, in Cincinnati, in one of these 33 localities across the state, which only cover 30% of Ohioans, let's be clear, then you're right. You don't have the right to walk into a restaurant. You don't have the right to buy a house or get a home without discrimination. You don't have the right to not be fired from your job. And now it appears that you don't have the right to access the health care that any other adult would be able to walk in and get. It is, and when we talk about the informed consent for adults, that is not just the standard for gender affirming care. That's the standard
for anything,
for adult health care.
Yeah.
And let's be clear, gender affirming care is health care,
right?
Period. And so the standards for health care should be applied for gender affirming care. We shouldn't be trying to create new standards simply because we don't understand what's going on. None of us treat cancer.
Right.
None of us treat sickle cell. And I had a cousin who had an experimental treatment for sickle cell at one of our big children's hospitals here in the state. The legislature was not involved, and that was actually experimental. He was the first child to ever receive it, and the legislature wasn't involved. It was between him, his parent, and the doctors. And that is the way all healthcare should be. And for adults, it should be an informed consent standard as it is with any other type of service.
Well, and again, this all comes down to, frankly, bigotry. This is literally what it is. It is pure, unfettered bigotry. And, you know, and I guess there was, I read in the news, what was her name? Representative Lear, that, you know, was saying something about, brought up Luke like 17:2 about, you know, putting a millstone around your neck and throwing yourself in the ocean.
Yes.
That wasn't per se in relation to...
That was for the HB 183 hearing. So unfortunately, there are other anti-LGBTQ
and
bills.
HB 183 is what?
It is they just titled it, we don't care what the title is,
Right.
It's the bathroom ban. Essentially is what that is. And it's a bathroom ban that's going to impact not only our K through 12 schools, but our colleges. Where again, those are adults. Those are adults in colleges. So this isn't about protecting children. The sports ban isn't about protecting women or women's sports. It's about protecting power and protecting the status quo. And right now, that is the status quo of marginalization for the trans and LGBTQ communities.
Well, and this really folds nice and neatly into sort of the Christian nationalist playbook.
It does.
Because again, using religion as a bludgeon to basically knock down anyone. And this is the party of freedom. I'm going to use air quotes. These are not bunny ears, just air freedom. Just doing everything they can to impose. And I made mention before the show that I don't care what your religious practice is. I really don't. It can be as strange as you want it to be. I mean, if you want to watch the Brady Bunch and sing the Brady Bunch song and that's your form of worship, by all means, you go. I just don't want to be a part of it. I don't want to have to follow the dictates of your rules because I don't believe in them.
And what we know is that, first of all, the number of clergy that showed up and testified against HB 68, again, outnumbered the number of clergy that we saw testifying for HB 68. And what the polling and the data shows us is that at least here in the state of Ohio, the majority of folks who claim faith actually are in favor of LGBTQ rights. So it is the hijacking of faith and religion and saying that all faith, all religion is opposed to this. And really it is a small minority of folks who are trying to impose their thinking on the vast majority.
Well, and this is the one thing that I, when I talk with friends who, they're like, why are you so into politics? Well, it's not because I love them, not even a little bit. It's because you don't understand that my life is under the gun all the time. And it doesn't matter, it's not just the LGBT community, it's the African American community, it is the Latino community, it is the immigrant community. I mean, insert name of marginalized group, and we have to pay attention to this. And one of the things that I mentioned, and this went back to 2016 when President Trump was elected, I thought, don't worry, everyone is pro gay rights, pro gay marriage. And I go, you don't understand how government works. All it takes is a very few number of people in some very important positions who can completely run roughshod over the will of the people. And we have seen that time and time again. And again, what it's doing to the trans community, it makes me honestly want to vomit, because it is so upsetting that, people whose lives are already difficult enough, let's make it even worse. And, and I would imagine that, as a doctor, you probably, like youth going through school, I'm sure that you hear about them being bullied, because, what does bullying do to a kid?
So yes, I definitely hear that topic, deal with that topic, offer support, and try to help families fight and combat the bullying. And a lot of this, as we're having these conversations and talking about this, is the way in which trans and non-binary identities are discussed is often pathologized. When I used the term in the last segment about gender diversity and also gender incongruence versus gender dysphoria, not everyone has dysphoria, and that term is rather pathologizing. And so that's a part that's important to remember with informed consent, is that being transgender or non-binary is natural. It is something that is not new. It is not a fad. It is not something that is suddenly coming on, and this is something that has always existed.
Since the beginning of time.
When we look across cultures and we look across the globe, and I love to point people to some very good National Geographic pages that have some amazing, researched and sourced materials to educate on. And so that's one of the things when we deal with bullying is in the schools, kids are often bringing that in because what they're hearing at home and what they're hearing in the media. And our gender diverse youth are hearing this in the car, when they're listening to the radio, when they're watching TV. And so when I mentioned earlier the stigma, it internalizes. You hear it and you start to internalize it without ever realizing that you're doing it. And that is where a lot of these depression and anxiety concerns come from. Higher rates of self-harm, higher rates of suicidal ideation. If we have youth that are supported, if we have youth that are in a supportive family, community, school, those rates dramatically decrease. And we see that their rates of depression are no higher than their age-matched peers. The rates of anxiety are only marginally above that of their age-matched peers. And so all of this conversation, definitely, I think part of it has to do with just how these conversations are happening in the State House. And so I did want to just point that out with informed consent, and how it's a little bit different with kids and more supportive, because they are growing and developing, and everyone is trying to be just as safe as possible to make sure that we're giving them all the tools they need to be successful adults and to live long, healthy, successful lives. Because as I say all the time, that is what I want for my patients, is I want them to be happy, healthy, and have a long life, and just as their parents do. And again, their parents want what's best for them, and that's the care that they're, information that they're seeking.
Right. Well, and it just treating people like humans. Yeah. These are flesh and blood people trying to live their lives. It's just, and the reason I brought up bullying is because you never hear anything in like these committee hearings about, well, bullying is wrong. We may disagree with this, but bullying is wrong. It shouldn't happen. You don't hear any of that with respect to, individuals who are transgender, the LGBT community, just in general. We're the favorite punching bag, and
But we're punching back.
And that's good.
Yeah.
That's good.
We are.
Pinned.
The fight isn't over. We are at a place right now where the House has voted to override HB 68,
Now it's the Senate.
and now we're
Now
going
it
to the
must be
Senate.
And that's the 24th of this
Well,
month?
that is, I want to be clear that is the first scheduled session for Senate. They have until December 31st, the end of the
So
legislative
this
session.
could go on throughout the rest of the year if they
It
wanted
could. Do we think they're going to
No.
do it on the 24th? Yes,
Yes.
but they don't have to. There's nothing that says they have to. They have until December 31st. So, but the fight continues. And I want to say that very clearly. The fight continues, the resources continue, the care will continue, because we're going to make sure that it does. And there are so many people who are dedicated to making sure that it does. But folks are tired, if I can say that. We've been fighting, like I said, the sports ban for 5 years, the medical care ban for 3 years, and now we're fighting an adult care ban.
Yep.
And this is the moment for allies. If there were ever a moment for an ally to get
Now is
involved,
it.
now is it, because this is not a trans issue. This is a freedom issue. This is a
human rights issue.
It is a human rights issue. It is a bodily autonomy issue, and we all have bodies. And we all have the right to be autonomous in those bodies. So it's an issue. It's everyone's issue.
Absolutely. So we've come to the end of the show, and we could probably talk for hours more, on this particular topic. Just in terms of, I would imagine we're going to put up some information, for Equality Ohio, for example, and how, to go out there, see what can we do as individuals, because it is important. And to your point, allies are needed now more than ever. Now is not the time to sit and be complacent. It's an all hands on deck, approach.
Absolutely.
And so I thank you all for what you're doing. And, Bobbie, my heart goes out to you, because I just can't imagine how this makes you feel. It's just, it breaks my heart, and for all the kids out there and the other adults, this is horrifying. And so hopefully, we've, informed you, as far as the realities of trans care, as well as, from the political standpoint. So please go out there and make a difference. People's lives really, really do depend on this. Thank you for watching the show, and we look forward to seeing you again.